So before I start talking about nutrition and immunity, I would like to start by defining some basic concepts. Next slide, please. So that we're all on the same page. So throughout the talk, we're going to hear me talking about pathogens, and just pathogen, as many of you might know, is a bacterium, virus, or other microorganism that can cause diseases. So when a pathogen enters our body, it encounters the immune system, and what happens is that it activates two different parts of the immune system. One part of it is referred to as cellular immunity and humoral immunity, which gets engaged in terms of production of antibodies against that particular pathogen, and then the cellular immunity in terms of killing that particular pathogen. And then the other part of the immune system produces a set of inflammatory responses, and you've been, in recent months, have been hearing a lot about the cytokine storm and inflammatory responses as it relates to COVID-19. So in general, that response is a good thing in terms of defending against the pathogens. And under normal conditions, our body has the ability to, once we have dealt with the pathogen, the body has the ability to downregulate that inflammatory response and go back to the baseline level, and all will be good. But if there is, if the body doesn't have the ability to control that, then those inflammatory compounds can go around and damage the sort of the standard, the innocent bystander tissues. When, for example, and as I mentioned, we need both the cell-mediated immunity and the inflammatory responses in order to deal with an invading pathogen. If there is hypoperformance or underperformance of the cell-mediated immunity, then we become susceptible to infections, autoimmune disease, cancer, and arthritis. On the other hand, if there is overactivity of the inflammatory responses, and if the body can't control it, then that predisposes us to a condition which is sort of a chronic inflammation, and that predisposes us to many of the chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and neurological disorders, as well as pulmonary diseases, which we have heard about in the recent months in relation to COVID-19. Nutrition plays a very important role in regulation of the immune system. If you have deficiency of any of the nutrients, that can impair the cell-mediated immune response and also cause uncontrolled inflammation, which then predisposes you to infection. And the infection itself can also cause changes in the metabolism and the status of the nutrients, so you will enter a vicious cycle of undernutrition leading to infection, infection causing changes in nutrition, and so forth, and so on. Now, we know that 1 in 3 of the global population is suffering from what is referred to as hidden hunger or micronutrient deficiency, and that is not just in the less developed countries, but it's also, some of it is also observed in more developed countries as well. Other factors that influence the immune response and our ability to fight with infections are obesity or overnutrition and aging. Both obesity and aging can also cause impairment of the immune response and result in chronic inflammation that would increase susceptibility to infection. And as you know, 13% of the global population is obese, and 8.5% of the global population is over the age of 65, and that number is actually closer to 18% in the more developed countries. The reason that is important, as I mentioned, is that both aging and obesity can impair cell-mediated function, so makes us more susceptible to infection on one hand, and also increase inflammation, which makes us more susceptible to chronic diseases on the other hand. Now, how does nutrition affect infection? There are several ways that nutrition can impact infection. One is by changing the risk for acquiring infection by interfering with pathogen entry, regulating cell-mediated immune response, and also changing vaccine efficacy. The other way is by changing morbidity by regulating oxidative stress and inflammation. Nutrition can also influence pathogen virulence, as has been shown in some of the study in relation to antioxidant nutrients, and it can also impact the gut microbiome, which can then indirectly impact the immune system. A concept that is very important to keep in mind when it comes to nutrition and immunity is that the relationship between nutrient level and immune function is not always a straight line. So the more is not always the better. Often this relation is curvilinear when you can reach an optimum level of immune response with certain level by increasing the level of nutrients, but then after that you may actually impair the immune response. What we are very clear about is that deficiency of the nutrients can impair the immune response. But what is not clear often is that what happens if you keep on increasing the level of nutrient intake. To some extent, to a certain level, you would improve the immune response, but after that there might not be actually further improvement, and that's very important to keep in mind. So let me give you some example of some of the nutrients that have been shown to control and regulate the immune response and what happens if you change the level of the intake of these nutrients. One of them is vitamin E, and which we can find in nuts and certain oils and so forth. There has been several studies showing that vitamin supplementation of the healthy elderly can significantly improve in vivo and in vitro indices of the T-cell mediated function, which is the arm of the immune system that actually declines, and its function declines with aging. So here's one example of such a study. In this study, we were looking at response of the older population, older subjects, to vaccine. We used hepatitis B as a model vaccine to look at the effect, and we did a study, a double-blind placebo-controlled study in which the subjects were given either a placebo, 60 IU per day of vitamin E, 200 or 800 IU per day of vitamin E. And as you can see, by increasing the level of vitamin E, we were able to increase the antibody response to this vaccine, and the optimal level was 200 rather than the higher level, which was 800. Similarly, we find the same type of results looking at another indices of T-cell mediated function. It's referred to as delayed type hypersensitivity skin response, and again, we find that 200 IU per day was the optimal level in terms of improving the response in the older population. This slide just is looking at the impact of vitamin E on influenza infection in an animal model. You can see that and what you're looking at on the left-hand side is the level of virus in the lung of the animals who have been given a controlled diet or a diet that has been supplemented with additional level of vitamin E, and you're looking at the level of virus in the lung, and you can see that vitamin E supplementation can significantly reduce lung viral titer in these animals. And you can also see that vitamin E is capable of reducing the inflammation that is caused by the viral infection in the lung of the animals, as shown by looking at the level of the cytokine interleukin-6 and another cytokine called TNF-alpha. Based on these, we conducted a human study in which we supplemented nursing home subjects with participants with 200 international units per day of vitamin E for a year, and then we documented the incidence of respiratory infection. What we found was that vitamin E supplemented subjects had significantly lower risk for respiratory infections, particularly of things like common cold. Another nutrient that there's been a good amount of studies done in relation to immune system is zinc. And zinc, as you know, is found in many of the animal products. There are several groups, even in the developed countries, that are at risk for low consumption of zinc. And that includes children aged 1 year to 3 years, adolescent females, and older adults. So in a study that we did in the nursing homes in and around the Boston area, we found that 30% of the nursing home residents had low serum zinc level. And in another study, we found that 22% of independently living older adults had low serum zinc level. The reason that is important is that in that study, we were able to show that the older adults who had low serum zinc level had significantly higher incidence of pneumonias, as well as duration of pneumonia, antibiotic use for pneumonia, and the duration of antibiotics. So suggesting strongly that the zinc status of older adults is important in terms of their susceptibility to pneumonia. We then showed in a subsequent study that if we supplemented older adults with zinc for 3 months, we could significantly increase their serum zinc level and improve T-cell function. What we now need to demonstrate is whether indeed by supplementing older adults who are zinc deficient, we can improve their resistance to pneumonia. Our observation of the study certainly strongly suggests that. Now, several studies have actually looked at the impact of zinc on common cold, and a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trial showed that zinc supplementation could shorten the duration of symptoms of the common cold. It didn't necessarily have an impact on incidence, but it did shorten the duration of common cold. Another vitamin that we have also heard a lot about recently in terms of its relations to immune and inflammatory responses is vitamin D. Vitamin D, as you know, it's found again in animal products, and it's also produced in our body by exposure to sun. There have been a lot of studies looking at vitamin D and immune response, originally because vitamin D was shown to increase expression of antibacterial protein, and it was shown to limit certain aspects of the acquired immune response so that it could potentially have a role in protecting against autoimmune diseases and tissue transplant rejection. And low serum vitamin D was linked to higher risk of upper respiratory tract infection in observational studies, although there is some controversy around that. Not all the studies have been supportive of that. And it's not clear whether by increasing the vitamin D level, we can actually reduce the level of respiratory infections. Vitamin C is another vitamin that you have heard a lot about in relation to immunity and infection, starting by several years back due to the work of Linus Pauling. Vitamin C, the reason there is so much interest in it is that immune cells accumulate and concentrate vitamin C, and then they can quickly use it up when there is active immune response to an infection. The scientific evidence regarding the effect of vitamin C supplementation on immune function is hampered by several methodological shortcomings. Either the studies that have been done are short in duration, or don't have an adequate number of subjects, or didn't use the appropriate outcome to look at this. In terms of vitamin C and infection, there are several important things that need to be considered. One is, and again, there is controversy in that, and that I think is because of lack of attention to these issues that I'm about to discuss. First of all, the baseline vitamin C status of the study population has an important effect in terms of whether you're going to see a beneficial effect following supplementation with vitamin C or not. So if you have someone who is low in vitamin C, then you can expect to see a benefit. But if somebody is adequate in vitamin C level, you might not see a benefit from further supplementation. A lot of factors such as physical stress, oxidative stress, smoking, and diseases can increase the need for vitamin C, and therefore you might be able to see beneficial effect under those conditions. At this time, however, the scientific evidence is insufficient to advocate vitamin C supplementation in the prevention of pneumonia in general population. And results on effect of vitamin E supplements and common cold also is not conclusive at this point. Now, let me get back to spend the remainder of the talk to discuss with you what we know in terms of the human coronavirus and nutritional status. I have to tell you that we don't know a whole lot, but that there is some interesting observations. So as you are all familiar, there are many human coronavirus is presented in many different forms. Some of them do not cause a severe disease, such as the ones that are listed here, and others can cause pathologies, including SARS-CoV-2 or COVID, which causes the disease COVID-19. So a very interesting part of this virus is this club-like spikes that you see on the virus, which has given it its name, which comes from crown. It gives it a crown-like appearance, and that's why it's called coronavirus, and that's where the name comes from. And these club-like structures are important in terms of the pathogenicity of the virus, because these structures can bind to the receptors on the cells, and that's the first entry level to the cells where they can duplicate and use the duplication machinery of the cells itself to replicate and then cause the disease. Now, it's important to understand how does the immune system respond to a coronavirus infection. The phase 1 of response is the viral entry, and there is the formation of a specific adaptive immune response to eliminate the virus and preclude its progression to the severe stage. Now, if the virus is not controlled, then we go to the phase 2, which is the inflammatory response, and that is where we see a lot of damage, and what has been referred to as the cytokine storm, which causes the acute respiratory syndrome, which can cause to severe disease and death. Now, nutrients can obviously interfere with several of these, but in both phase 1 and phase 2 of the viral infection. For example, zinc has been shown to inhibit coronavirus and arterivirus RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which is an enzyme that is needed for the proliferation of the virus. So by doing that, it can block the further proliferation of the virus. Although we don't have any direct evidence that zinc does that, but it has been shown to act in that manner when it comes to other viruses that are very similar to the virus that causes COVID-19. Vitamin D, for example, has been shown in a smaller study, it was shown that the level of vitamin D was low in those who had a more severe type of the disease, but I have to say that the same subjects who had severe disease and had vitamin D deficiency also were older in age. So it's an observational study and needs to be proven by conducting double-blind placebo-controlled study, which is I understand that there are a couple of studies who are looking at this question. So it's very encouraging and suggesting that vitamin D may be playing a role in terms of severity of COVID-19, but it's not absolutely proven. There's also a lot of interest in vitamin C and coronavirus, and reports indicate that intravenous injection of vitamin C may help people that are suffering from this disease. There are some studies that are being conducted in China and Italy, and some of the physicians have included it as part of their sort of protocol to deal with subjects who have severe cases of coronavirus. But again, it hasn't been proven through larger type of studies, and we have to keep in mind that intravenous vitamin C may function very differently than oral vitamin C, so we can't sort of automatically transfer those results to a higher intake of vitamin C orally. Another nutrient and food component who has received a lot of attention recently is quercetin in relation to COVID-19, and the reason for that is that computer modeling identified quercetin as a top agonist to COVID-19's S protein, those sort of crab-like structure that I mentioned before, that bind to the host cell, ACE2 receptor, which is the entryway for the virus to the cell. So with computer modeling, it seems that quercetin can interfere with the binding of the virus to the receptors, which is the first entry point for the virus. And so there's interest in understanding whether, in fact, quercetin can inhibit proliferation and infection from COVID-19, but that's a question that needs to be addressed in when we have the opportunity to conduct those type of studies that are needed. So to summarize, I hope that I have been able to provide you some evidence that nutrition is very important in terms of optimal immune and inflammatory responses in general to any type of pathogen, but could also have implications for SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19. There are several places where nutrition can interfere with pathogenesis of COVID-19. It can reduce the viral entry or viral proliferation by interfering with binding of the virus to the receptors on the host cell. It could improve adequate nutrition, could provide optimal adaptive immune response to the virus and effectively get rid of it or reduce its burden. It can also reduce the inflammatory response that is caused by the virus if we have adequate level of some of the antioxidant nutrients such as vitamin E, vitamin C, or zinc or selenium and so forth. But these are all potentials in terms of COVID-19, although we have evidence from other viral infections that this could be happening. We don't have direct evidence that in fact it will be effective. Any of these interventions will be, in terms of nutrition, will be effective against COVID-19. But what is very clear is that nutritional deficiencies can impair cell-mediated immune response and increase inflammatory responses, which can predispose the subjects to infectious diseases and chronic diseases. So it's very important to make sure that there is adequate nutritional status. And with that, I want to thank you for listening, and would now pass the podium, or the virtual podium actually, to Sarah Downer, who is Associate Director at Harvard Medical School, and she will be discussing adhering food and nutrition insecurity among Medicaid HCBS beneficiaries.
Thank you